South Carolina is known for its southern charm, but what most people don't know, it's also a hotbed for urban legends. From dead pirates, hurricane ghosts, and even America's first female serial killer ghost, South Carolina's underbelly is both terrifying and strange. Today, we will look at 10 of the many urban legends the Palmetto State has to offer. The old Iron Truss Bridge on High Shoals Road, just south of Anderson, South Carolina, is known as Crybaby Bridge. This bridge was built in 1919 in Virginia and brought to Charleston, originally to connect two counties together. Eventually, in 1952, it was brought to Anderson to replace an older bridge. From the 1840s until the 1900s, there was a grist mill below the bridge, and in 1894, an electrical plant was also built. The bridge across Flat Creek has changed many times over the years, from having no bridge to a wooden bridge, and then the iron bridge, and then finally a cement bridge that now runs beside the old iron bridge. The old iron bridge was closed to auto traffic in the late 1950s, but it is accessible by foot. According to legends, sometime in the early 1940s, a young mother was on her way home and had to cross the bridge. It was late at night and she was very tired. She needed a good night's rest because her husband was due home from the war the very next day. Daydreaming about his return and exhausted, she took the bridge over Flat Creek a little too fast. Her and the baby were thrown from the car. The young mother was searching frantically for her baby. She could hear him crying in the dark. As she searched, the crying grew fainter and fainter until it stopped altogether, as did her heart. It broke right there. According to legends, you could still hear the baby cry and see the mother searching frantically for him. Built in 1793 by Captain Jack Stoney, a Revolutionary War hero, Baynard Plantation was part of Braddock Point's plantation. The house was about 1,885 square feet, built with timber and a mixture of oyster shells, lime, and sand. The plantation overlooked the Calibogue Sound. No one is quite sure how the home fell into the hands of the Baynard family. One theory says that in 1837, the Stoney heir bet the home in a poker game and lost. Another theory says that the Stoney heirs, unable to afford the upkeep, filed for bankruptcy and William Baynard acquired the estate from the bank. William Baynard, a successful cotton planter, and his family occupied the home from 1840 to 1849. Shortly after William's death, the plantation was raided by Union troops during the Civil War. The home also housed many soldiers during the war. At the end of the Civil War, the house was burnt to the ground by the Union Army. Today, all that remains of the plantation home and slave quarters is foundations, a corner wall, and a few foundations of the outbuildings. There have been several reports through the years since William Baynard's death of people claiming to see his ghost roaming the property after dark, and sometimes he is followed by his entire funeral procession. Many people have also claimed to see his spirit at Zion Cemetery and the Baynard Mausoleum where he is buried. Lavina and John Fisher owned and operated an inn called the 6 Mile Wayfair House in Charleston, South Carolina. Rumors started to spread around the community, and even reports were made to the local sheriff about people going missing after visiting the 6 Mile house. Because there wasn't enough evidence and John and Lavina were a well-liked couple, the claims were never investigated, so some of Charleston's vigilantes decided to take matters into their own hands. The vigilantes set out on February 16, 1819. they were a well-armed mob operating under Lynch's law. Their first stop, 5 Mile House. When they arrived, the mob ordered everyone inside to leave. At first, they started to protest until the mob set the building on fire. Next, they set off for 6 Mile House. When the mob arrived, they again ordered everyone out. This time, the occupants complied. When everyone was out, David Ross was left behind to watch the property, and the mob returned to Charleston. The occupants returned to 6 Mile House angry and violently attacked Mr. Ross. Somehow, he escaped into the woods and got back to Charleston. He reported what happened to the authorities. He said that William Hayward came to the house with another person whom he didn't know and grabbed him, violently pushed him out the door. Mr. Ross then confronted Hayward, demanding to go back inside and get his things he left. That's when everything became more violent. Hayward put a hand on his chest, saying, "You damned infernal rascal! If you lay a hand on anything, I will blow your brains out." Fisher and his wife Lavina came up then with 2 other men that Ross didn't know. Lavina proceeded to choke him, then put his head through a window. Then Hayward and Fisher beat him with loaded whips, along with 2 other unknown men and an unknown woman. Somehow, Ross was able to get away. Ross said that while he was making his getaway, he heard Fisher scream, "You damned infernal rascal! If I catch you, I will give you 100 lashes." 2 hours later, John Peoples, who was watering his horse at 6 Mile House, claimed he was attacked and robbed. He gave a sworn affidavit saying that Lavina and John Fisher were part of the gang who attacked him. Sheriff Nathaniel Green Cleary gathered a group of men and went to 6 Mile House and surrounded the property. The gang inside peacefully surrendered. John and Lavina Fisher, along with James McElroy, Seth Young, and Jane Howard, were loaded into the paddy wagon for their 6-mile ride to the city jail on Charleston's Magazine Street. Some of the posse stayed behind to search the house and the outbuildings. When finished the search, everything was burnt to the ground. John and Lavina appeared in court on January 17, 1820. The original assault with intent to murder was dropped, but they were sentenced to hang for robbery on John Peoples. Some citizens and the local clergy pleaded with the governor for a time of respite for John and Lavina to make peace with God. It was granted, and the date of the execution was set for February 18, 1820. Lavina believed the extra time would ensure her pardon. The Fishers' last weeks were spent with Reverend John Richard Furman, who was determined to prepare their souls for the afterlife. John was welcoming, while Lavina was consumed with professing her innocence and didn't believe her governor would actually hang a woman. On February 18, 1820, when the Fishers arrived at their execution, John bravely climbed the scaffold, but Lavina refused. She was dragged screaming to the crowd to rescue her. In desperation, Lavina started to curse and damn the governor to hell. John tried to plead with her to stop, but she refused and said, "Cease! I will have none of it. Save your words for others who want them. But if you have a message you want sent to hell, give it to me. I'll carry it." Both John and Lavina were hanged on February 18, 1820 at 2 p.m. Their bodies were buried at Potter's Field. Lavina is reported to still haunt the old jail. But Lavina's story doesn't end here. There's something else disturbing about her story. The Yorkville Inquirer posted on August 8, 1922, "Skeleton on display." The article says that Lavina Fisher's skeleton was on exhibit at Charleston's museum some time ago, but was removed because it was out of order. The museum decided to again install it, and it is now going to be put in order. The Yorkville Inquirer continued in the article about John and Lavina, what they were hanged for. Considerable curiosity was aroused over the continued disappearance of those who stopped overnight at the hostelry, and it was found that the guests had been murdered and their bones buried in the cellar. Lavina is also reported to haunt the streets of downtown Charleston, angry and bitter at her mistreatment, looking for her bones. There is enough history of Folly Island to fill a library. From the beginning of its recorded history, events have unfolded that shroud the island in mystery and tragedy. When Europeans first arrived on the island in the early 1600s, they found a native tribe known as the Bohiggins. By the late 1600s, the tribe had been wiped out, and it is still a mystery as to what actually happened. During the 1700s, pirates, including the famous Blackbeard, would hide out along Folly Beach and coves. In 1832, one of the most disturbing stories of Folly Island occurred. The ship, known as Amelia, that was bound for New Orleans from New York, wrecked off the coast near Folly Island. The 120 surviving passengers were cast ashore. Rather than being sent to the safety of the mainland, they were quarantined on the island and left to fend for themselves because of rumors that cholera had broken out among them. 20 of the survivors died of the cholera while stranded and are said to still haunt the island today. One of the most popular legends of Folly Island comes from a time of the Civil War. The nearby Morris Island was the site of the famous Fort Wagner Battle of 1863. During the battle, the western side of Folly Island was used as a Union Army field hospital. Many returning from battle died here. Most disturbing to grasp is how many were buried in unmarked graves here while fighting for control of Charleston. Over the years, hurricanes and heavy storms have uncovered some of these unmarked graves. In 1987, the remains of 14 unknown soldiers were uncovered on the western side of Folly Island. If that wasn't disturbing enough, 12 of these bodies were missing their skulls and other body parts. Today, residents still report hearing disembodied voices in their homes and yards. Some have reported the smell of burning flesh in their kitchen. One resident reported that in the middle of the night one night, she felt what felt like a child jumping on her bed, and she had no children. Just across the harbor from Charleston is the beautiful, historic James Island, which serves as a gateway to the Atlantic Ocean via Folly Beach and Morris Island. The area has a long history of Native Americans, settlers, pirates, wars, soldiers, forts, and many other historical sites. Many people have visited the area throughout history, from the natives who hunted and fished, to the explorers that discovered the area, settlers who started settlements there, to pirates and soldiers who also occupied the area. Morris Island was where the pest house was located in 1834. The pest house was where the sick and contagious people entering port would be dropped off. Boats had to unload any sick passengers and crew before they were allowed passage into Charleston Harbor. Morris Island was also heavily fortified, which centered on Fort Wagner. On January 9, 1861, the first shots of the Civil War were fired from a cannon. Morris Island was the place where heavy fighting happened during the Union Army's campaign to capture Charleston, and it is best known as the location of the ill-fated assault by the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. This assault had over 50% casualties. After the Confederates left the island in 1863, the Union occupied it. They transferred about 600 Confederate soldiers from Fort Delaware to Morris Island. After the war, a Union soldier that survived the battle for Morris Island had a strange but interesting story to tell unrelated to battle. Right before the battle for Charleston, a Union soldier named Yoakum was ordered to relocate everyone living on Morris Island to Port Royal. While speaking to one of the women on the island, he learned that a pirate had buried 6 treasure chests somewhere between 2 oak trees in her yard. She said the pirate captain had stabbed one of his men and let the body fall on top of the chest before covering them up. Yoakum asked her if the treasure was still there. She said yes. Nobody would go near the trees because of the dead pirate's ghost guarding the treasure. About midnight that very night, Yoakum and Lieutenant Hatcher left their camp along with shovels to look for the treasure by the old oak trees. As the men began to dig, the tops of the trees started to sway like a hurricane was coming in, even though it was a windless night on the island. Lightning started to flash, but no thunder followed. They continued to dig, and the lightning flashed again. This time it lingered. Suddenly, the men realized they were not alone. There, in the strange, prolonged lightning, was the clear figure of a pirate. Scared, they dropped their shovels and ran. The next day, the attack on Morris Island began, so they were unable to return to the site. 50 years later, Yoakum retold his story, and it was recorded. In the mid-1800s, Julia Legare was visiting family on Edisto Island, where she fell sick and ended up slipping into a coma. After several weeks of waiting for her to awake, the family physician declared the girl dead. In those days, people were buried quickly to avoid decomposition. The same day of Julia's death, she was quickly dressed, and as soon as the family paid their respects, her body was taken from Edisto Island Presbyterian Church and interred in the family mausoleum. Once she was placed in the crypt, a marble door was closed and locked. 15 years later, there was another death in the family, and the mausoleum had to be reopened. It was then the gruesome discovery was made. There, at the foot of the mausoleum door, was Julia's body. She had been buried alive. It is believed that her respiratory and heart rates dropped so low they were undetectable, and she was pronounced dead. When she was interred, she was not actually dead, but in a coma. Julia's remains were entombed again, along with the relative whose death led to the grim discovery. The door was once again securely closed and locked, or so they thought. When the family returned to pay their respects, they found the door opened. Thinking it was improperly secured, they closed and locked it once again. A few weeks later, a church clergyman saw the door open and ordered it to be closed. This kept happening throughout the decades, even though they started using chains and unbreakable locks to keep it sealed. Somehow, the locks would always break and the door would be opened. About 60 years ago, a door was put on that could only be removed by heavy machinery, and again it was found open and completely unhinged from the mausoleum. It was then they stopped trying to put a door on that mausoleum. Today, the original marble door sits broken in the grassy doorway of the tomb. According to legends, Julia's spirit is still guarding the mausoleum to make sure nobody puts a door back on the building that killed her. Visitors to the cemetery and mausoleum have reported feeling an essence around them, and others claim to have captured strange images on their cameras that can't be explained. General Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, was an unlikely hero. History saw him in two different lights. Americans saw him as the crafty Swamp Fox who won the Revolutionary War for the South, and the British viewed him as a butcher who killed Indians for fun during the French and Indian War. The truth lies somewhere in the middle of these two views. In 1775, he was newly elected to the South Carolina Provincial Congress when the Revolutionary War started, and he joined as a patriot. Marion's militia was known to use guerrilla tactics to surprise the Redcoats, which he learned from the French and Indian War. This strategy was very successful. The British never knew where he would attack next. General Marion had many spies, including a girl whose father was a British supporter. After the capture of some of Marion's men, the girl got a note to him telling him where his men were held in her home, the Wedgeville Plantation. While the family was out at a neighboring plantation, there was only one sentry guarding the captives. Marion and his men rode up, and the sentry called out to them. Either Marion or one of his men took out his saber and swiftly chopped the sentry's head off. The men were freed, but that is not the end of the sentry's story. A few nights later, a servant at Wedgeville Plantation reported seeing a man dressed in a British uniform, with no head, and blood dripping down his neck walking up the drive. Of course, no one believed the servant at the time, but a few nights later, the plantation owner's daughter, the same one who was the spy for Marion, heard hoofbeats outside and went to her window to see who would be coming that late at night. When she looked, she didn't see a horse, but what she did see horrified her. There, staggering up to the veranda, was a headless figure in a British uniform. Then it suddenly disappeared. Many people have witnessed the Headless Sentry through the years. The last report was in the 1930s, right before the plantation burnt to the ground. The Wedgeville Plantation was later rebuilt and now serves as a country club and golf course. Even though there have been no recent sightings of the sentry, legends say his body is still buried somewhere on the property, and the sound of hoofbeats can sometimes still be heard. In the peaceful, quiet city of Newberry, just outside of town along Buncombe Road, which used to be the stagecoach route between Ebenezer Church and Goshen Hill, there is a local legend that has been terrifying residents for over 100 years. The ghost hound of Goshen is said to be a large white ghostly dog with glowing eyes. The animal is very aggressive to people it encounters on this stretch. It has been known to growl, chase, and even leap on people just before it vanishes. According to legends, the hound is the faithful pet of a peddler who was passing through the area in the early 1850s. At the time the peddler was passing through, a local man was murdered. The peddler, being a stranger in town, was accused and hanged. He was buried in the Ebenezer Church Cemetery. His dog refused to leave the gravesite and has lingered there, guarding its territory even in death. Palmetto Dunes seemed to have everything, including its very own ghost. Residents of the island have been telling the story of the Blue Lady who appears on stormy days and nights for years. Although there are many versions of the story, most say that the Blue Lady is Caroline Fripp. She and her father were keepers of the lighthouse in the late 1890s. When the 1898 hurricane hit South Carolina, Adam Fripp, really dedicated to his job, stayed at the lighthouse through the storm, trying to keep the light bright because of a ship that was dangerously close to shore. Suddenly, Adam dropped to the floor, suffering from a heart attack. Caroline found him and took him to the house. On his deathbed, he asked his daughter to keep the light burning throughout the storm. When Caroline returned to check on her father, she found he had passed. According to legends, Caroline paced back and forth between the lighthouse for several days after her father's death, wearing the same blue dress she had on during the storm, calling out for her dead father. She continued to do this for a long time, eventually dying of shock, they say. On New Year's Eve in 1889, 3 young men were walking home from a party and stopped near the railroad tracks to watch the bright moon. According to legends, all 3 men were killed on the tracks. Some legends say it was a logging accident, while others claim it was a train crash. The men were buried in Stano Baptist Church right behind the railroad, all 3 with unmarked headstones. Legends say the men still haunt Ravenel in the form of 3 oncoming lights. To see the lights, you must park your car along the street, walk to the church, and knock 3 times. When you return to your car, 1 bright light will appear and then temporarily disappear. It will slowly fade back into view along with 2 other lights that come towards you.